Hello, everybody. It's really good to be here virtually at the brand new SMPR, Society for Music Production Research Conference. I would have loved to have been there myself in Leeds, see all my old friends, but such was not to be. So the topic for today is creating songs in AI, the Constrabling effects of Tradivation, and hopefully I can explain all of these odd terms as we go along. But the very first thing that I want to do is acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I am on today. I'm certainly not you. You will be there virtually, as I am there virtually for you. But I'm on the land of the Pembalong clan of the Awabakal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. The other acknowledgement I want to make is to a colleague of mine, Joe Velikovsky, who's been really helpful, not only in co-writing this particular piece for me, which came out a couple of weeks ago, but also in guiding me in particularly how to prompt ChatGPT quite well. And we had a fairly lengthy discussion about what were the best ways to prompt ChatGPT and get the responses that you're looking for. So once again, I just want to acknowledge Joe before we go on, because I probably wouldn't do it at the end. So to locate what it is that I'm talking about today, in 2019, I was asked to give a keynote at the inaugural Songwriting Studies Research Network event, which was held in Birmingham in the UK. So thank you, Simon Barber, for that. But in that paper, entitled Songwriting Practice and Production, the Past, Present and Future, which I thought was a very ambitious title on my part, but nonetheless, I really enjoyed writing it. But I observed there that the possibility, when I was talking about the future of songwriting, the possibility of a piece of automation being able to create a convincing song using plausible titles, familiar structures, interesting lyrics, rhyme schemes and catchy melodies in one adaptable and learning software application is not too far away. I'll kind of circle back to this at the end, that particular statement, and see whether, in fact, we have got there yet or not. So in putting the abstract together, I posed a couple of questions for myself to answer. So let's just call this paper an exploration of answers to those questions. And the first one that I was asking was, can we ascribe agency to technology? And of course, I'm not the first person to ask that question. It's been asked for quite some time. The work of Axel Bruns comes to mind in particular, and a few others as well. Springing from that question was another one for me. Can we recognise the complementarity or the complementary effect of the concurrent use of tradition and innovation, which has been labelled in other spheres Tradivation, and the constraining and enabling process, which of course in other realms has been called Constrabling, and what that presents to the system of songwriting. And I think that those whole questions of agency and Tradivation and Constrabling are actually really well tied up together. So let's get started on that. And of course, I want to look at the research literature on creativity, which of course I've done quite a lot of, as those of you who know my work will attest to. But I just want to remind you very quickly of the basis of what it is that I'm talking about when I use the word creativity. So across my 30 years of writing about and researching about this particular word, there's a body of research literature that I have had to encounter and completely make a 180-degree change about my thinking on what I initially thought 30 years ago. And I'm more and more convinced of the ideas that have come out of this research literature as well. So an evidence-based explanation of creativity requires us to look critically, that's an important process, by the way, to look critically at our own cultural assumptions about how creativity works. And as Keith Sawyer says, the scientific studies of creativity fail to support our most cherished beliefs about creativity. And that's an important point to actually bear in the back of your mind. We are scholars as academics in the institutions that we're in right across the world. So we're really concerned with the scholarly approach rather than the cultural assumptions that we come across all the time. So just to remind you, that scholarship is defining creativity in one particular way. There's two ways to phrase it. From 1997, Teresa Amabile from Harvard University defined it as the production of novel, appropriate ideas in any realm of human activity, from science to the arts to education to business to everyday life. So it's not just pertinent to artistic activity. And I think we tend in this particular culture here in the West to conflate the two terms, creativity and artistic activity. Not the case when you look at the research literature. Again, in 2010, Beth Hennessy and Teresa Marble gave a very similar definition, is that creativity involves the development of a novel product, idea or problem solution that is of value to the individual and or the larger social group. So I think there are two things we need to bear in mind here. One is the question of novelty and what constitutes novelty, and the other one is the question of value in relation to that novelty, how we ascribe value to that novelty. And we're not just talking financial value, but also social, cultural, and so on. So those two words are critically important to the research literature on creativity. In terms of the methodological processes and what's happened in that literature, I think these are reasonably good summaries, very precise, of course. Once again, Beth Hennessy and Teresa Marble from that same overview in 2010. So that research into creativity has grown theoretically and methodologically sophisticated, which it has. But deeper understanding requires more interdisciplinary research based on a systems view of creativity that recognises a variety of interrelated forces operating at multiple levels. And then in 2017, Beth Hennessy returned to that overview to see what had happened in the decade or so since that was written. And she said that researchers and theorists were doing all that they could to break down questions of creativity into the absolutely smallest components they could control and measure. In that same paper, she gave an overview of what she called the reductionist approach, which is what the first sentence is talking about. And then she went on to say that an exploration of the most recent literature reveals that this situation may in fact be changing. A growing number of publications are now reflecting a systems perspective, which is fortunate for me because at least since 94, I've been working with a systems approach, the systems model of creativity. And we've adapted, and when I say we, I mean the research group, primarily here at Newcastle, but other colleagues around the world as well, have adapted the systems model of creativity originally put forward by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi in 88, again in 99, and a really great summary in his book in 2014. This adaptation, or I call it a reconceptualization of the systems model of creativity, was in the paper that I mentioned earlier from the Songwriting Studies Research Network in Birmingham. And you can see that that system involves a domain of knowledge or a symbol system of some sort, which is primarily where the system information is held, all the data. So let's just say that the domain there is constituted by all of the songs that have ever been written and the associated knowledge that goes with those songs and songwriting. And the field is the, I won't say second major component because there's no order in systems, there's no hierarchies there. Each is equally important to each other. But the field is the social organisation, in this case engaged in co-opetition, both cooperation and competition in order to gain some understanding of the domain and gain some foothold inside the field itself. And that field is constituted by people who hold the domain knowledge. So we can think of domain as a knowledge system. We can think of the field as a social organisation of people who hold the domain knowledge. And of course, there's an agent, some person, some group of people, some collection of organisations, etc., that possess their own unique but shared backgrounds that bring something about those backgrounds to this system of songwriting. And as agents, those people and dyads, groups, collectives, etc., make choices based on the knowledge system, the domain, which they're drawing on all the time, to rearrange that domain knowledge in some way and come up with a novel and valued song, which the field judges to be good, bad, or indifferent in some way or another. That's probably the quickest way that I can explain that systems model of creativity to you. But that's roughly where I would suggest that the literature in creativity studies is up to approximately at this point. I've also adapted Bourdieu's ideas and compared them. I certainly did in that paper in 2019 from the Songwriting Studies Research Network, amalgamating both Bourdieu's ideas with that systems model. They can't be literally mapped over the top of each other, but I think there are a great deal of similarities. But if we are dealing with systems, there are some characteristics of systems that we need to come to grips with that are common to all systems, whether they're biological systems, economic systems, or in our case, cultural systems. And of course, the notion of complexity is really important. I'm not going to dwell on these for any length of time. We don't have that much time to get through it all. Systems are, of course, non-linear. We've got to move past the idea of a linear process of cause and effect and start to look at the notion of non-linearity. And systems, of course, have emergent properties that come from their interactions. Songs being one of the emergent properties of a creative system. And this particular creative system of songwriting, that's most definitely what emerges. And of course, the interconnectedness of those systems, both within the system, the interconnectedness of the agent, the domain, and the field. And of course, those systems being connected both horizontally and vertically to each other, which gets us to the notion of scalability, that you can scale creative systems to processes above and below what's going on, say with the dyad or with the creative individual. They exist in some context, so that's probably the best way to describe that. But the one I want to concentrate on today is the notion of complementarity. And complementarity is represented there in that yin and yang symbol, I think, reasonably well. When we look at complementarity in systems, we're really engaging in moving away from either or assumptions and dealing with both and assumptions. There are some thinking about creativity that would say it's purely heuristic and doesn't value the idea of algorithmic processes. So in other words, we want it to be organic. We don't want it to be mechanical. Practice is far more valued than theory, particularly in the West. This is not the case right across the world, by the way. Creative practices seem to be disruptive. And we tend to put that disruption in opposition to the question of maintaining systems. Free will and determinism, this is where my work is really focused as well. Tended to be put in opposition to each other as well. The questions of agency, which is associated with free will, and structure, which is associated with determinism, are often put in opposition to each other. But what the notion of complementarity does is it suggests that agency is complementary to structure and structure is complementary to agency. Or to put this another way, it's not either agency or structure, it's both agency and structure. So moving from either or processes to both and. And it's the same thing with the processes that we tend to think enable us to do things. Let's get rid of structure because structure there only stops us, it constrains us from doing things. And we want to be enabled in our creative practice. So, enabling is good, constraining is bad, etc. But the notion of complementarity says that enabling and constraining actually occur at exactly the same time, usually by exactly the same process. And we have a similar effect occurring with innovation and tradition, which I've written a separate paper on altogether. By the way, the papers that I'm talking about in this initial stage are listed in the reference material in the back of this PowerPoint, if you want to get at those. So that we tend to put innovation in opposition to tradition. We can't be traditional if we're going to be innovative. If we get stuck in tradition, we can't, be free enough to produce novel things. But, the argument, of course, from the question of complementarity of systems is that innovation and tradition are actually complementary to each other. Innovation, in some senses, is as I'll get to in a second. Excuse me. Innovation and tradition are complementary. That is, there is a process of what's called Tradivation in place. These are ugly words, by the way, but I just want to point out to you each one of those individually that we're talking about here. I think that's important. So Tradivation, in fact, as you can see, is a combination of both tradition and innovation. And that serif there indicates the both and process of complementarity, which comes from Kelso and Engstrom's work, by the way. And it's popping up in a few places, not too many, but I think it's important to understand that certainly from Negus and Pickering, Keith Negus and Michael Pickering. Some of you might be familiar with Keith's work. But in their book, Communication and Cultural Value, they put a whole chapter on tradition in there, which they started off by saying it's a common misconception to regard innovation and tradition as diametrically opposed to each other. Creativity doesn't emerge out of a vacuum, but builds on one or more existing cultural traditions. And in those senses, they're getting closer to the idea of Tradivation than anything else. There's a design site, Japanese design site called Kasasagi, which I think has got a great explanation of what's going on. And they claim that Tradivation is the merging of tradition with modern innovation, recognising that tradition, this is the important point, is an accumulation of past innovations. So the two things, tradition and innovation, are tightly wound together. Same thing going on with enabling and constraining. This is from Harry Kritikos's work, who came up with this word constrabling, and I've been endeavouring to put it out into the world ever since. But Harry says that the structures in which practice take place, the habitus, he's drawing on Bourdieu's work heavily here, by the way, the habitus that assists practice, the agency that affects the way we practice, and the various forms of capital that help us engage in practice do not in fact constrain us at one point and enable us at another. We as practitioners are constrained and enabled by these structures at exactly the same point in time. In other words, we are constrabled by these structures. What he means by that is that we probably can't do without engaging with structures. And of course, at the same time, those structures limit what is possible for us to do. And he's getting very close to what Anthony Giddens was talking about there with the notion of structuration. So in other words, the notion that agency, our ability to make choice, is complementary to structure. So structures beget agency, agency begets structures. That's really what Giddens' argument is. Or to put it another way, structuration is the merging of agency, that is the ability to make choices, with the supposedly deterministic structures which predispose action. And of course, this is really what the post-structuralists were attempting to get away from. The idea that the structural processes that Freud had put together, that Saussure had put together, and a number of others as well, those large structural, Marx was another one, those large structural understandings of the world, the big models, the big patterns, etc., which seemed very, very deterministic. And not so much deterministic from this point of view, but create contexts for predisposition to act. So the ability to make creative choices, that is, have creative agency, depends on having social and cultural structures in place. So that's both Giddens' argument and certainly Harry Kritikos in his question of constrabling draws on. And I think you can see it exemplified in the notion of Tradivation as well. This book by Brian Arthur has been used heavily in Silicon Valley as an explanation for the way that technologies come into being. It's interesting to me, actually, that he's working in San Francisco, and Csikszentmihalyi, before he passed, was working just a short way south in Los Angeles. And I wanted to put the two of them together because Brian Arthur's ideas seem to me correspond very well to what Csikszentmihalyi was saying with his systems notion. But such was not to be. But in that book, The Nature of Technology, What It Is and How It Evolves, Arthur argues that the representative technology is no longer a machine. And machines are not systems, by the way, but we'll get into that in some other venue. With fixed architecture carrying out a fixed function, it is a system, a network of functionalities, a metabolism of things executing things that can sense its environment and reconfigure its actions to execute appropriately. So that's where we want to go now. Here's where we get into artificial intelligence, and we look at the typology or the types of artificial intelligence that we could be dealing with. It's not just one thing. But the overview of that is that all technologies where machines are taught or trained to act, to perform like human brains, fall under the notion of AI. And of course, the first one that we should be familiar with is the question of expert systems. And expert systems are things like chatbots, certainly the very early chatbots. If you've engaged with Siri or Alexa or a call center that uses a chatbot, etc., you engage with an expert system. And all it really means is that we have a human expert who, in our terms, has a significant degree of domain knowledge and standing in the field, transfers his information to a knowledge engineer, so as someone who engineers knowledge, which is then put into or coded into an inference engine, which means that if solution A is required, if the situation A presents itself, then we move to situation B or C or D or whatever. So there's usually a tree of choices involved, very limited series of choices, and some simple chatbots and some more complex chatbots, etc. Then there's a user interface of some sort, and then we have a user like you and I who may not be an expert, but we're asking questions of that expert system. So it's based on a big set of rules that deterministically drives its action. So that question of determinism in action is written in, as far as I'm concerned, into that expert system. It may not be the one that we're after as far as songwriting and AI goes. The next level up is machine learning. And remember, I'm not an expert on this as well. I'm coming to this probably as fresh as you are. This is where we get into the notion of algorithms or models that are trained on available data to predict, classify, and cluster them. These come under the notion of ML or machine learning. So they're never explicitly programmed, rather they learn from patterns of data, and that's what they're very good at, identifying patterns, seeing where they repeat, and what could possibly come out of them as well. So they're in some ways probabilistic. We feed them on very large quantities of data generated usually from internet usage. That's fed into a system that identifies similarities among sections of data, and the machine learning system begins to get better at predicting, which is the probabilistic part of it, where the next piece of data should go. If we're looking there, for example, is actually facial recognition, self-driving automobiles, and so on. So there's a machine learning process that goes on here. Deep learning uses a slightly different system, but this principle is exactly the same. We feed it data, it learns from the data, and is able to predict what basically will come. But deep learning, which is a form or a subset of machine learning, is based on numbers of artificial multi-layered neural networks of transistors, all tied together and talking to each other, talking within themselves as neural networks, but multiple neural networks of transistors all tied together, essentially trying to mimic the way that the brain is thought to function. And the more data you feed into this deep learning system, the better it gets. And it doesn't plateau at any point, as some of the earlier machine learning algorithms did. But it just keeps learning and learning and learning and grows exponentially as you keep feeding more and more information into it. So real-time language translation, I think, is a relatively good example. And I think it's Baidu or Baidu that the Chinese are working on at the moment, where you can just simply talk into the machine and it will automatically, like UN translators, will work in a very similar way. So there's another explanation there as well. By the way, if you haven't noticed this yet, there's a lot of text here as well, but it's the black bolded text I think that's important to stay abreast of. So while basic machine learning models do become progressively better at performing, they still need some human intervention. I think that's a big difference. But with a deep learning model, an algorithm can determine whether or not a prediction is accurate through its own neural networks, and there's minimal to no human help required. It's able to learn through its own method of computing, a technique that makes it seem like it has its own brain. And we're getting close to ChatGPT at that particular point, which is a form of what they call generative AI. So it's a deep learning model that can generate high quality text, images, and other content based on the data they were trained on. So generative models encode a simplified representation of their training data and draw from it to create a new work that's similar but not identical to the original data. Now, that's really what I want to concentrate on. So we've got ourselves to this particular point. I'm not going to go fully into this particular methodology that I use for this research, but I've written a complete paper about this as well, which is also in the reference list at the end. But just simply say that practice-based inquiry as a methodology encompasses a self-reflective examination of the practitioner's own activity through a process of participation in that activity. So what I've tried to do is write a song using AI. The advantage of that particular methodology is it allows the insider's perspective, the creative practitioner's perspective, and adds this to the stock of research knowledge that we could get from, say, a quantitative process or a qualitative process. That's as far as I'll go in that. I have published on this before, and I'm just going to go through this very simply, but this will set us up to see how we move into songwriting and AI. There's an example of an agent who's making choices to write a song. And this is my songwriting book for a song called and I Can't Get to Sleep, which I've published on before. And you can see some of the choices, quite literally, the editing that's going on, particularly with the lyrics. The journal itself that I've written with the PBE process and that's in the paper as well, the published paper, about the musical element of the song itself. Just very, very quickly, I, as the creative practitioner in this process, have been immersed in songwriting for a long time, from when I was growing up, around the piano with my family, with sing-alongs, etc. Pieces of sheet music that person playing the piano and we're all singing to was my first interaction, etc. Coming across people like Hoagie Carmichael and Irving Berlin. My mum had a Victrola with the old 78s. I was listening to the Hot 10 on the local radio station, top 10. And then 64, I started listening to the Beatles, and I've been listening to them ever since, as people like Paul Thompson will attest. Went through a whole series of vinyl collections, which I still have a fairly significant part of it. CDs, moving into the virtual world with MP3s and so on. And I have myself been inside the field of songwriting, the field of popular music, for a long time as well. You can see that long head layout down there at 17, and then you can see me in the studio down the bottom right-hand side, many, many years later, engaging with people who understand songs to various degrees, songwriters themselves, some important songwriters, some local songwriters. And I, of course, myself have been writing and performing songs. So I have a domain knowledge, I have a field knowledge, and I've been immersed in both. So here's the song that resulted from the interaction of that system, the agent, the field and the domain at work. And you can see there a highly patterned ternary form song called I Can't Get to Sleep, which is basically a lead sheet. It's the melody line, the lyric, and chordal structure, and of course the overall structure of the song. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about a song, and most people do. It's interesting because the next thing I want to talk about briefly is here. People are saying when you look at a lot of these pieces of AI that are supposedly songwriting AI, they're either producing music, not just the melody, but arrangements, accompaniment, orchestration. I've talked about this in one of my early papers about defining songs as well. But when I'm talking about in this particular paper a song, I'm talking primarily that representation in the lead sheet, lyric, melody, some basic structure that they both fit into. So I browse through a number of the supposed songwriting AI, wind up looking like music generators or lyric generators or a combination thereof, not precisely that particular way. So as far as the 2019 paper goes, I don't think we've progressed to the point where I thought we would get to far more quickly, at least from the research that I've done. If anyone can tell me that there is a lyric and melody combined generator in one piece of software or one piece of AI, please let me know. I've done some searching and I couldn't find it. In fact, I gave up and I went to ChatGPT and asked it to do a search for me. And to paraphrase its response, it said, OpenAI's MuseNet or JukeNet can generate music and some lyric content, while Amper Music generates music but offers some tools for creating melodic ideas. So there is a bit of a differentiation between melody and music. Most often when they say music, it's the arrangement. So Amper Music needs to be supplemented with additional tools or manual input to generate lyrics as well. That seems to be characteristic from what I can find. Ava is focused on creating music but may require external tools or human collaboration for lyric generation. IBM Watson Beat also helps create music, but would need to be integrated with other tools for lyric generation. Endless is a tool for collaborative music creation and can generate melodies, but for lyrics, you'll need to use separate tools or write them manually. And then the conclusion that ChatGPT came to, which is much the same as I had, we still appear to be at that stage of combining different tools, one for lyrics, one for melody, which I was quite disappointed about because I thought it would move faster than that. And if it has, and someone in this group knows, please let me know. So what did I do? Well, I took a fairly fundamental basic piece of AI, let's call it an expert system almost, and tried to combine the melody that I could generate out of that with ChatGPT and combine them in a lyric sense. And that went out into the field through another series of AI, through DistroKid, wound up on iTunes and Spotify and so on, all of which are operating with the basic forms of some form of artificial intelligence as well, to select whether or not those songs rise up in the lists, reproduced, and so on, etc. So we could say here that the agent making the choices, and I'll come back to this in my conclusion, is a combination of the human and the AI itself, or what David Schreier calls AI plus human hybrid, human plus AI hybrid. One process which I've found in looking at all of these pieces of software that I did get to, that it seems to be a workaround. I was attempting at one point to put a line with asking a ChatGPT to produce a line with a sentence, one sentence with, say, 23 syllables, 2 syllables, 10 syllable sections, and then et cetera, to come up with some way to then generate a melody from that. And here's one way, which you can find for yourself as well, how to make music using AI, GarageBand plus GPT, which is primarily what I was trying to do. But you can see that there's a number of steps involved that you would have to get ChatGPT to actually code it. And it's a bit like the really early drum machines. The coding is really clumsy and yeah, I would say very, very clunky. And the human has to intervene at some point and give some sense of melody to what ChatGPT was trying to do. It wasn't producing melody. It was just producing a structure that you could then turn into a melody, as far as I was concerned. That get converted to another process. So you need Google Colab to run the code that ChatGPT creates, and then give it instructions to create the MIDI info, which will allow that to write music. As I said, it's very basic, etc. And then the MIDI files will input into GarageBand, and lo and behold, you as a human can hear it. But you still don't have a lyric to go with the melody, or certainly the instrumentation that GarageBand is capable of producing for you. So you then go to ChatGPT, and one of the songs that I'd come up with across 4 different nights was 4 different songs, ranging from a song called Chindia Effect to the very last one, which I call the mesmerizing order of things. It was the closest I could find that was a highly structured piece. So I went to ChatGPT and asked it to write a song for me called The Mesmerizing Order of Things. And I did ask it some specifics. And of course, it was very obliging and said, certainly, here's a revision of the mesmerizing order of things with 2 4-line A sections, the contrasting B section. The title is included in the 4th line of each A section. It took me about 5 or 6 goes to get it to understand what a ternary form of song was and the way that those songs were structured. But I think it's done okay. I would, if I come up with these lyrics, I would be happy. Reading lyrics on a page without the melody, without music around it, is always fraught. I always think of Little Richard and a wop bop a loo bop a lop bam boom. Nonsensical when you read it on the page, but when you hear it sung, makes a lot of sense, at least to me. But you can see there the lyrics that ChatGPT has come up with. But so far, it's not combined, solidly put together with the melody. So we can't really say we've got to where we need to go. So I could say that ChatGPT has probably scraped things like Apple Music or iTunes or whatever. You can see there are 100 million songs, and there's probably more of them there, in order to gain a deep knowledge of what songs are. And with a little prompting can spit out a fairly reasonable song, which is really what we do, I think, as humans. We can have a bit of a debate about that in the question and answer a little bit later. I tried to figure out what would the field be in terms of the systems model for a piece of AI writing a song. And it would be much the same as a human songwriter, except maybe the intermediaries would be the selection mechanisms that occur in Spotify and iTunes and Pandora and various other things. As DistroKid, which is a pure piece of AI, disseminates that out into the field. But we would still need people to interact. And as Keith Sawyer had said early in 2006, the intermediaries in the field play a critical role in evaluating creative works, but after they've made their choices, the ultimate test for a creative work is whether or not it's accepted by a broad audience. And there, you can go yourself to YouTube and have a look at those 4 songs, ranging from Chindia Effect to Doorway to the Edge of the Emergent, Fade Up to the Star-Strewn Sky, and there's the song, The Mesmerizing Order of Things. And I put those inside a collective process called The Tree and the Machine, which the astute amongst you will recognise as a phrase that comes from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I did that purposefully, especially given his antecedents with romanticism. So there's a song, but it's just the melody and arrangement, no lyric. I had to go back to the mesmerizing order of things that ChatGPT spat out for me in order to get the lyric. So I, as the songwriter, have to put the two things together. I haven't quite come up with a piece of software yet that will do it. I don't think there is another one there as well. So coming back to the systems model of creativity, we could see that it's quite possible we could say that the agent could be a piece of AI. This might be anathema to those romantically inclined amongst you who see art practices in a very particular way. But if we just look at it as a system producing cultural products, in this case songs, then yes, I firmly believe that a piece of AI, especially generative AI, could have agency as it's being defined in a sociological sense by people like Anthony Giddens. So the prior conclusion from that song that I'd written initially and published was this. In taking the knowledge system, and I've just added in square brackets, tradition, innovation, and the new words as well, etc., so you get some sense of what I'm talking about. In taking the knowledge system, tradition, and rearranging aspects of it to create novel and valued cultural products or innovation, songwriters make choices. They act as agents in this process whose essential task is to produce some variation in the field's inherited information or domain, its traditions, in other words. And in producing these variations in the symbol system, we'll call those variations innovations, they make decisions and choices about them. In other words, they have agency. And the limitation on autonomous decisions making are, however, set by the field and domain. That's the structures inside the system of songwriting, acting as both a set of constraints and enabling factors, which we call constrablers, or Harry Kritikos has, making creative choice possible. Now, I'm going to go to another conclusion here, a tentative conclusion. I suggest that we could give agency to AI. And the possibility is still there, but I still think it's only a possibility. In scraping the data of the knowledge system, let's call that the tradition. So you can see I'm paraphrasing that same conclusion I had before, updating it to 2024, and rearranging aspects of it to create novel and valued cultural products, in other words, be creative, the innovation process. Artificial intelligence in the form of generative AI makes self-guided choices. This form of AI, and I would suggest only that form of AI, certainly not expert systems or anything related of that type, acts as an agent in this process, and its essential task is to produce some variation in the field's inherited information or domain, in other words, its traditions. In producing these variations in the symbol system, that is, coming up with an innovation, it makes decisions and choices about these variations. It has agency. And the limitations on autonomous decision-making are, however, set by the field and domain, acting as both a set of constraints and enabling factors, constrablers, making creative choice possible for this form of artificial intelligence. However, I think that conclusion is only tentative, and I want to put forward another possible conclusion, and it goes like this. In scraping the data, I think this, in fact, is a conclusion to the research that I've just done. In scraping the data of the knowledge system, tradition again, and rearranging aspects of it to create novel and valued cultural products, that is, producing an innovation in the creative process, in a process of tradivation, putting those two things together, tradition and innovation. Artificial intelligence in the form of generative AI makes self-guided choices assisted by a human interlocutor who also has acquired a degree of songwriting domain knowledge. It is the combination of AI and the human collaborator which forms a human plus AI hybrid, which is a term that David Schreier has come up with, or I will call the creative dyad, which I have done in other papers, which itself acts as an agent in this process. This dyad, or creative partnership, has the task of producing some variation in the field's inherited information or domain, its traditions. In producing these variations in the symbol system, in other words, making an innovation, the songwriting partners, that is AI and the human, make informed decisions and choices about these variations. The limitations on autonomous decision-making are, however, set by the field and domain of songwriting, acting as both a set of constraints and enabling factors, which makes creative choice possible for this partnership. I'm going to go to my final conclusion here, which I mistakenly left in the prior slide. Never mind. As more and more people interact, particularly with generative AI, the AI in this human plus AI hybrid is learning more and more about songwriting. not only through the scaping, but through its interactions as well and its interconnections with humans. As David Schreier attests, in the background, masses of people are training the AI to be smarter about how it analyses and therefore uses this analysis to reproduce more and more accurate songwriting. But as far as I can see, we're not fully there yet. What happens, particularly to songwriters, when we actually do invent a piece of automation being able to create a convincing song using plausible titles, familiar structures, interesting lyrics, rhyme schemes and catchy melodies in one adaptable and learning software application? And that's a thought I think that we probably need to discuss and debate. But just before we do, if you want to find references to the material that I was talking about earlier, you can see it there, you can see it there, you can see it there. So thank you. And we'll open the floor to questions, discussion, debate, contentions, and so on. So thank you.